Hello, welcome to another episode of Pragmatic Electric. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges of having an electric vehicle in Australia as opposed to other countries around the world. Obviously every country is going to be different, but I'm just talking about the progression of charging infrastructure. So Australia is not actually that far behind in some respects, but the challenge that we have is the challenge of distance versus demand. So in North America, for example, there are many millions of people, like something like 300 million plus people live in the United States. And in Australia, we have around about 30 million. So we are 1/10 the population of the United States, probably slightly less. So the problem is, therefore, the proportion of cars that are going to be electric cars is going to be substantially less as well, which is going to mean that the market here will be smaller, which means that there's less demand for charging infrastructure. So talking about charging infrastructure, there's different use cases for it. The first use case, charge at home, plug it into the wall, AC outlet, put a dedicated wall charger, for example, like I've got, high-powered wall connector, what have you. That's not what I'm talking about. That's all very straightforward and essentially is a solved problem for any house that's got power, electricity to it. Whether it's renewable energy or not, the fact remains that that's readily available from pretty much every house. So that's not the issue. The issue is actually long distance and long days around town. So long days around town, if you're going to a shopping centre and then you have to drop what you're doing and then go somewhere else, and then some call comes up and you need to go and run somewhere else, even if you left home with a full charge, you may get to the end of that day or get very close, you're turning around to go home and you're not going to have enough to make it. Having some convenience charges in and around where you in and around the city so that you can have a quick charge before you head home is very important. So in and around the city there needs to be a charging network. Doesn't necessarily have to be fast charging, but fast charging is a lot better. The real problem though is once you want to go between towns. Going between towns is quite frankly a problem. So in a car like a Tesla Model 3, standard range plus, it's got a range of about 350 Ks. Now if you went to a long range model, you're going to get another 120 Ks out of it or thereabouts. So that's all well and good, but eventually you are going to have a charge, and you're going, if you want to go for further than that. So let's say I'm driving from Brisbane, which is where I live, to Rockhampton. So that drives around about 650, 700 kilometers. I'm going to have at least one charge in there, probably two on a standard range plus. So in other words, I need to have fast charging infrastructure placed at midpoints or 2 or 3 points along that journey. But it's not quite that simple, because of the low demand, and of course the cost of installing that capital infrastructure and the small number of people that use it, it's been very difficult to justify installing fast chargers in those areas. So what ends up happening is they'll put in one DC fast charge, and the one they particularly go for, at least the initial stages of this deployment, was the Tritium RTM50. And the RTM50 essentially, although it has one CHAdeMO and one CCS2 combo connector on it, can only charge one car at a time. You would think that with multiple car parks put aside for that purpose, for that function, you would think that you would be able to charge 2 cars at once, but you can't. There are more recent models that can. Of course, the obvious solution would be to install more than one, but unfortunately they haven't. In some cases, there's a backup charger, which is a standard Type 2 Menakes style BYO cable, and that's just a standard AC charger, which for some models that you could upgrade a Tesla to 22 kilowatts of charging. All Model 3s are 11 kilowatts, so that AC charge from flat to full is going to clock out at about 6 hours, which is quite a long wait If you're going to charge overnight, maybe that's fine, but if you're trying to get to Rockhampton and you want to do a day trip, it's going into the realm of impossibility. A very long day, if you're going to rely on AC chargers. The problem with is quite simple, and that is that once a car pulls up and is charging, they're there for at least 45 minutes. That particular charge is a 50 kilowatt charger, which is exactly why there's been a push for, in the Tesla world, V2 and V3 superchargers. So that way you can actually get in and out of there from 20 to 80% in a matter of 20 minutes, maybe 25, 30 minutes tops. And that makes it quite manageable. So the contingencies you're fighting against when you rock up to one of these chargers, you're on a long road trip. If someone's there, you have to wait for them to finish. So just doing some really quick math, if each car is there charging for 45 minutes, that's not going to be from flat to full, but it's going to be at least 80%, maybe 85%, depending on what the state of charge when they rocked up. So in a 12-hour, in every 4-hour period, you'll be able to charge 5 cars. That's assuming that they show up one after the other, which is probably not realistic, but let's just go with that for the moment. So in a 12-hour period, therefore, you're going to have 15 vehicles. So that one charging station in daylight hours can, at maximum efficiency, only realistically charge 15 cars. So as long as you've got more than that, anyone taking that road's relegated to the AC charger. So the second problem that you've got, beyond the congestion problem, is quite simply, what if it's broken? There have been chargers that I've used with a CCS2 combo cable is out of service, but the CharterMo works, but I don't have a CharterMo adapter, so that's not particularly useful, in which case you're relegated to the AC charger. So you would think that Tesla would be paying more attention to this, and the supercharging stations that they're installing them on the most highly trafficked routes around Australia. So lucky me, I live in Queensland. Queensland is an enormous state. It's the second largest state in Australia at some ridiculously 1.8 million square kilometers, I think, from memory. It's huge. I mean, in terms of just relative terms for North American listeners, that is 2.7 times bigger than the state of Texas. So, it's significant. So Tesla have been installing their superchargers predominantly on the main freeway. So the Princess Freeway, so Brisbane to Sydney, and Hume Highway, Sydney to Melbourne, Canberra, and the western roads out from Melbourne out to Adelaide. So we have coverage between major cities, but the major capital cities in each state. But beyond that, it's getting a bit thin. New South Wales is doing a lot better than Queensland. They've got significantly more, and they're installing some now on the Barrier Highway out via Broken Hill, which is awesome to see. In Queensland, the Queensland Electric Superhighway, I think they started building it in 2017, and it consisted of 2 preliminary stages, and both of those have now been completed. And at this point, they've installed chargers all the way from the border of New South Wales. There's a little bit out on the way to Toowoomba, and the rest of it goes north all the way to and ends at Port Douglas, just along the Bruce Highway, which is the main north-south highway in Queensland. So in terms of records, it's the longest electric superhighway project in any one state anywhere in the world. That's not particularly impressive necessarily, just because Queensland's such a big state. And it's probably not a title we're going to hold for long, with Western Australia moving ahead as well with their next stage of their network. So the stage 3 of the Eureka, spelled with a Y, so Y-U-R-I-K-A, the Eureka network, that stage 3 expansion will take out the western roads. It'll go out to places like Chinchilla, Roma, and then out on the central Queensland highway out west, the Capricorn Highway, I should say, and that'll go out through Emerald, Blackwater, and on the way out to Barcaldine, eventually Longreach, Winton, and eventually to the Isa, way out near the border with the Northern Territory. And then finally, the last connection across through places like Hughenden, Julia Creek, as you're heading in towards Townsville. So that's going to plug a lot of those gaps and open up a lot of the infrastructure out that way, which will be great. But the same problem remains. The intention is exactly the same architecture, although the rumor has it they may be going with RTM 75s, which can handle, I believe they can handle more than one car. So as I said, this is a problem of population to scale. So right now, if you're a Tesla owner in Australia and you are relying on Tesla's supercharger network for you to go between cities, forget it if you are outside of the main thoroughfares. It just doesn't exist. Tesla are currently, their northernmost charger installation is at Gympie, which is about 2 hours north of Brisbane. They're planning one, they call it Maryborough, but it's actually at Childers, which is kind of odd because Childers is not really Maryborough, but okay. So Childers is going to get one, and it'll be right next to the McDonald's in Childers for those that know it. Which, well, according to the drop pin anyway, but still, apparently it's going to be done by fourth quarter of 2021, and considering there's 3 weeks of that left, not even, well, I'd say that's not going to happen this year. They're also planning another supercharger to go in Rockhampton, my hometown. So go Rocky, I suppose. But in the end, that's not scheduled until the the end of the first quarter of 2022. So whether or not that's far enough for you, because nothing goes west, and once you go north of Rocky, you're back onto the Queensland Electric Superhighway, which is fine. It's not redundant, it's not fast, it's not as fast as a supercharger, but it's better than nothing. So it's unfortunately a waiting game as the networks continue to grow and expand and extend. At some point in the future, there will come a time when we will look back and on these days of difficult to find chargers, broken chargers, no redundancy, and essentially when one's broken, you have to drive at 50 k's an hour between two towns in order to actually not run out of battery. Those days will eventually be behind us. But until they are, we are kind of stuck in this reality where you stray too far from home and you want to take a long trip. If it's not between the major centres, then yeah, you are at risk of not making it, which is a problem.